right, Definers, grab your chips, grab your guac. Welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Scott and I are here defining sustainability one topic and one bad joke at a time. This is episode 83 on avocado sustainability, Scott.
I love it. I love avocados. I'm glad we're diving into this. I love it on toast. I love it on chips. I love it with green eggs and ham.
All right, so Scott, what is the outline going to look like today?
All right, so first we'll talk about what are the key aspects of avocado sustainability, then how many avocados are produced each year and where. Third will be who are some key organizations and people working on avocado sustainability. And then we'll get into what should listeners keep in mind when buying and eating avocados, because we always want to get into practical advice for you. And then this is kind of different, interesting tidbits from each chapter of the book, The Avocado Debate. This is because the author of that book is joining us as our expert guest, Honor Eldridge, food systems expert and author of The Avocado Debate. So Jay, first section, what are the key aspects of avocado sustainability?
So while avocados have grown significantly in popularity with now 11 billion pounds of avocados consumed globally each year, there have been increasing concerns around the sustainability of avocado farming. Intensive avocado production in general has been attributed to loss of biodiversity and soil degradation due to the impacts from land and water use.
All right, so Jay, let's pick up on one you just mentioned there, land use. So forest lands with diverse ecosystems have been destroyed to produce avocados, and that often contributes to deforestation. Many times, older trees are removed to provide ample sunlight for those avocado trees, and this loss of forest cover is creating an increasingly hot environment and impacting the other native species that call those forested areas home.
The Michoacan region of Mexico.
Oh, how'd you know how to say that?
Oh, I looked it up. 100%.
Okay.
And the way I thought it was going to be pronounced, Scott, was incorrect.
Fair enough.
So
say it one more time.
The Michoacan region of Mexico.
Michoacan. Okay.
Where the majority of avocados are produced is suffering from deforestation, and around 40% of recent deforestation in the region has been attributed to avocado production. In this region, it is estimated that the land used for avocado production is equivalent to the size of 196,000 football fields.
This reminds me of the Green Burial episode, Jay. I forget what it was in relation to, but it was something about football fields. And it's funny how, people are like, oh yeah, that's understandable context, football fields. But at the same time, maybe our global listeners are like, what kind of football are we talking?
Right.
I think American football, probably.
I think so, and stay tuned, Definers, because I think we have some internationally recognized Olympic-sized swimming pools coming up as a standard of measurement, so hang in there.
Wow. All right. So often, large-scale avocado farming is a monoculture, meaning these are the only crops planted on the land. Over time, this degrades the soil, making it less fertile and usable. In addition, this area of Mexico is home to endangered monarch butterflies. As the avocado plantations have slowly expanded and started to reach into their habitat areas, including the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve, this species is becoming further threatened. So, Jay, I will tell you that my mom and my niece have been planting some milkweeds recently to help the monarchs, but it's nothing compared to this biosphere reserve, I'm sure.
That's right. I'd love to see their work.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked land use. Further, water use is an important consideration within the sustainability of avocado production. It is estimated that 9.8 billion liters of water are used each day to produce avocados. This is the equivalent of 3,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools needed each day just for avocado production. 1 hectare of avocado trees consume 1.6 times more water than a traditional forest. This is because the roots of the avocado trees grow horizontal across the soil rather than down into the ground, making it difficult for water to be absorbed. Some studies estimate that each avocado requires 30 liters of water during production, while others estimate that 140 to 270 liters of water are needed. Either way, this means that large amounts of water need to be extracted, often from regions of the world that are already experiencing water stress.
It's amazing how much water it takes to make certain things, or even like energy production. I know we talked about like cooling down things. It's just crazy how much water enables and some of the inefficiencies here of using the water. All right, so sticking with the water discussion, Jay, there have been some seismic movements that have been recorded in the Uruapan municipality and the surrounding areas in Mexico, one of the important avocado producing regions. And this seismic activity has been attributed to water extraction from the aquifers. So as the water is extracted, caverns on the ground have been opened up and could be the cause of these movements.
Lastly, as most avocados are imported from Mexico, there are concerns about the carbon footprint impacts associated with transportation. Some research estimates that for each pound of avocados, nearly 2 pounds of CO2 are produced, mainly due to the carbon impacts of transportation.
Wow, there's another one with a multiplier. And back, Jay, to the aquifers bit, I'd be interested to see a stat around what percent of crops globally rely on water from aquifers, because it just doesn't recharge all that rapidly in most areas. So that's an impending issue, I think, for a lot of agriculture. Okay, so looking at the social side of avocado production, the agriculture of these fruits is often complicated by an elevated presence of drug cartels, as in the central region of Mexico where the majority of avocados are grown globally. These gangs often demand money from farmers in the region, have threatened food safety inspectors when they visit the area, and have increased the levels of violence in the region. Because of this, many farmers have to invest a portion of their profits into specialty fencing and security to protect their crops and themselves from these gangs.
But as our expert guest explains in her book, the history of drug cartels in Mexico with avocados is a little more nuanced and complex than the headline suggests. We'll take a look when we get there. All right, so let's ask how many avocados are produced each year and where?
Okay, so due to the rise in popularity of avocados in Europe and North America, the demand for avocados has exploded in recent years. It's estimated that per capita consumption of avocados in the United States has grown by 440% in the last 20 years. And as we mentioned earlier, around 11 billion pounds of avocados are eaten globally. And it's estimated that in 2022, of those 11 billion pounds, 2.8 billion of them were eaten in the United States.
So you may be thinking, where exactly do avocados come from? Avocados are grown in warm and humid climates. While avocados can be and are grown all across the world, the majority of avocados that are eaten are from Mexico, specifically the Michoacan region, which produces 80% of Mexico's avocados. It's estimated that Mexico exports $2.8 billion worth of avocados each year. In 2017, it was estimated that Mexico produced over 2 million metric tons of avocados. This number has likely increased in recent years. For this reason, avocados are often called green gold in Mexico, as the production of this crop has contributed significantly to the country's economic growth. And, folks, after Mexico, the top countries for avocado production include Colombia, Peru, Indonesia, and the Dominican Republic.
Indonesia surprised me on that list. Huh? I mean, it makes sense when you mention the warm and humid climate, but didn't know that.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything else is like central,
right?
South America.
Mexico adjacent.
So. Yeah.
Okay, so if you live in the U.S., Mexico produces about 75% of all the avocados eaten here. There is some local production. In the United States, avocados are mainly produced in California, Florida, and Hawaii, with California accounting for the majority of our domestic production, about 88%. All right, Jay, let's move on to another section here. Who are some key organizations and people working on avocado sustainability?
There are a few organizations within the avocado industry that are working towards improving the sustainability of avocado production. Here are a couple. So number one, the Avocado Sustainability Center, a small community of family farmers who are dedicated to growing avocados more sustainably. This group was created by the Haas Avocado Board to drive research and improvement on sustainability within the industry.
The California Avocado Commission helps to promote more sustainable farming practices within the state of California. This group has worked to put in place good agricultural practices like no-till farming to help promote healthier soils and other regenerative agriculture practices to save water. Fair Trade International, that's another one, has started certifying avocados in an effort to address the labor and environmental challenges of agriculture. When certified to the Fair Trade standard, the risks within avocado supply chains around employment conditions and farmers' rights are mitigated. Further, the standard includes measures that prohibit the cutting down of protected forests and encourage farmers to conserve water.
But, as Honor discusses in her book, certifications like Fair Trade International do not consider the labor conditions across the entire supply chain, just the labor conditions on the farm. Also, the environmental standards as part of the Fair Trade label are not particularly stringent or high. They essentially focus on pesticide usage and land use change. Interesting factors to consider there. So, Scott, what should definers keep in mind when buying and eating these delicious avocados?
All right, so we talked a lot about the impacts of avocados on the environment. It's important we put that into perspective. So while the land and water use considerations along with the carbon impacts are important, these impacts are often significantly less than the production of some of our other foods. For example, the production of beef can use 10 times more water than an equivalent weight in avocados, so it's all relative. You have to consider everything in context.
As a consumer, here are a few things you can be aware of before you make your guacamole. First, you can work to buy local or seasonal avocados. As we mentioned, the majority of avocados are from Mexico. So if you're not in Mexico, these fruits are getting shipped to your local grocery store. If you're interested in potentially reducing CO2 emissions and you're close to California, Florida, or Hawaii, where avocados are produced domestically, you can try to opt for these local options.
So not that I looked at it super closely in the past, but I feel like I've seen Mexico, I've seen Peru, like the little stickers that say it on the avocado itself.
Yes.
Have you, Jay, maybe because you're closer to California, seen I'm from California?
Oh, Scott, I feel like I can't explicitly say no, but I just have a hard time because every time I say
we're going to hold you to it, Jay.
Avocados from Mexico. Yeah. But I mean, do you not hear this jingle, Scott? The avocados de Mexico.
From Mexico. It's great. Great marketing.
So good.
Yeah. All right. Well, in addition, avocados have a season like most other fruits. Typically, this season starts in March and ends in late July in California. So if possible, stick to buying avocados during these months. That increases the likelihood that you're getting something more local rather than imported. You'll notice that those months were after the Super Bowl. So, there's that. Second, you can support certified farms and look for certifications like Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance certified produce. These certifications can help to indicate that more sustainable farming practices have been used. While these certifications are not perfect, they are a good starting place in making a potentially more sustainable choice. Many fair trade avocados come from small-scale farms across Mexico, and the certification helps to ensure that farm workers are being paid adequately for their work in the production, as they are committed to improving employment conditions and protection of workers' rights.
And lastly, as always, be mindful of your portion sizes to minimize food waste, and feel free to choose more local alternatives to avocados to support local agriculture. Here we go, Scott. You got to tell me if this is something you might actually order. Mm-hmm. There's a trend now of pea toast as alternative to avocado toast in the UK. Peas offer a more local and budget-friendly alternative to avocados, but have a similar texture and lots of nutrients. Scott, if you saw pea toast on the menu, could you order it?
I would definitely give it a try. Jay, you lived in the UK. I mean, don't you remember, fish and chips, isn't mushy peas a common side with that?
Yes, and man, we just got to work on the marketing, I think, over there. Sometimes you'll order a dish and it's just peas on the plate. There's no seasoning or anything done to them. So my hope is that pea toast has a little bit more love put into it, let's say. And yes, I would absolutely give it a shot. Yeah,
but I'm saying I agreed on the marketing and all that. And I'm glad you'd give it a shot too. But I'm just saying, mushy peas, if that's already a thing, what's avocados? It's just mushy avocado on top of the bread.
Right.
So I feel like they're used to it a little bit.
That's very fair.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, that was a nice little thought-provoking nugget you had. Why don't we dive into more in the form of interesting tidbits from each chapter of the book, The Avocado Debate, which we're going to be speaking about further with the author.
Yeah, Honor has much better interesting tidbits than you and I can offer. So let's get into that. And Honor does a really great job of laying out all the different issues in her book. So we wanted to give one or two tidbits of information from each chapter of her book because we liked how it was laid out and there's so much good stuff in there, but also it gives you a sense of what she covers, and then hopefully you'll go out and buy the book and learn a whole lot more. So first, she dives into the history of the avocado. And this, I thought, was really cool. The stone at the center of the avocado actually gives a clue to its past. As with many plants, avocado trees need their seeds to be dispersed naturally to spread its genetic material and move into new areas. Well, a bird or a small mammal eating that stone would die, which you could probably put together. But the avocado evolved to attract actually the megafauna that weighed over 100 pounds that roamed the earth during the Pleistocene from 2.58 million to 11,700 years ago. And these big mammals would consume the green fruit, wander miles, and then defecate the seed out because they had no problem with that large stone. So that kind of blew my mind.
Well, and Scott, I might interject. You
Yeah.
nicely complimented my pronunciation of Michoacan earlier, but you whipped out Pleistocene like it was nothing.
Yeah. You didn't know that one?
No, I definitely would not have read that in the same
hopefully I'm saying it right as I'm like, oh, of course. Anyway, and then the earliest avocado into California, where we said most avocados in the U.S. are produced, was actually in 1856. So I love how this history goes from like 2.5 million years ago to like 1856.
So let's talk about the creation of the Hass avocado, which is, as I understand, most likely the version that you are going to eat with your next bowl of guac.
Yes.
So the Hass was developed out of a need for an avocado that was more resilient so that it could thrive in California's climate and could be better commercialized. By how vastly ubiquitous this species is, I think it's probably true to say that's been accomplished. One more tidbit, this Hass avocado arrived in 1925, and lo and behold, is named after a guy named Rudolph Hass.
Oh, Rudolph. So, Jay, have you traveled to, like, I think when I was in Kenya, like, I remember being offered these avocados, and they were, like, really cheap, first of all, but they looked different, and they tasted a little different. Like, have you had an avocado where you're like, oh, that isn't the normal avocado? Have you seen them?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And of course, the more we're talking about it, the more I want to.
Yeah, for sure. And around here in the States, you're not really going to see it. But in other countries, and in particular, my understanding is Australia has a lot of different kinds. So yeah, some for people to go look for.
Awesome.
All right, another chapter in her book, The Nutritional Value of Avocados. The avocado fruit is high in calories, but also has high levels of vitamins and minerals, including folic acid, omega-3, magnesium, potassium, lutein, and fiber. Lutein, Jay? I don't even know what that is. What's lutein? Sounds good.
It sounds nutritious.
Okay, I don't know. Hold on, I want to Google it. Lutein. Let's make sure we didn't make it up. Yeah, it's one of 2 major carotenoids found in the human eye. Whoa. Foods rich in lutein, including egg yolk, spinach, kale, corn, blah, blah, blah. I guess they help protect the eye issues from sunlight damage. Cool. I'll take lutein.
Nice.
And also the fat is mostly the healthier monounsaturated fat.
All right. So there's a chapter in Honor's book called Social Media, Marketing, and Influence. So in that chapter, Honor notes that there's this myth that avocado toast started in Brisbane, Australia in the 1990s. In fact, avocado toast has been commonly served in San Francisco to hipsters since at least 1885, when a recipe was published in a local newspaper.
Well, I feel like Americans should rightly lay claim, I guess, to the avocado toast. Like, hey, Australians, no.
Right. Like we've actually had this going for over 100 years on you. So yeah. I guess we'll keep it.
Okay. So the creation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and the reaction to it and impact of it is another chapter. So the U.S. enacted a ban on the import of Mexican avocados in 1914. This ban stayed in place for a long time. And even after NAFTA took effect in 1994, the import of Mexican avocados was slowed down since it was only allowed from certain places or during certain times of the year. And it wasn't until 2004 that the U.S. Department of Agriculture issued a final rule that allowed Mexican avocados to be shipped to all 50 states for all 12 months of the year. I had no idea it took that long.
Same. So we've talked a lot about Mexico's avocado monopoly. This is a chapter in Honor's book. Inside that chapter is an interesting stat. There is an increasing amount of land in the global south being cultivated to meet demand for guacamole in the global north. Still, though, climate change is allowing greater cultivation of avocados further north than ever before. Maybe not so much of a surprise to folks.
Yeah, it's certainly a trend. And, the global north is kind of riding the global south here. And I know we'll get to embedded water, but there's going to be a lot of water in those avocados that the south is sending to the north. So global avocado trade and shipping, another chapter. So trade ships, they're getting bigger and bigger. A typical major trading ship today now has the capacity to carry 740 million bananas, enough for 1 European each. That's a single trading ship. There are 14 major maritime, coastal, and inland choke points that global trade relies upon, and that if disturbed would have a major impact on our food system, so that's a little scary.
Okay, the topic here is land use change and biodiversity loss from avocado cultivation. With Central and South America becoming increasingly arid with longer dry, hot seasons and reduced annual rainfall, Large amounts of water need to be irrigated to maintain avocado plantations. Avocados come from trees, but the avocado tree has much less capacity to absorb carbon emissions compared to native tree species.
Yeah, and that's one thing I hadn't really thought about was trees having different capacities to store carbon. It makes sense.
Same.
All right, embedded water. When you buy an avocado, you're essentially buying the water used to produce each avocado. And this water has been taken out of a water-stressed environment and will not be returned. I mean, most of the time, at least, it's often grown in water-stressed places.
Mm-hmm.
And 77% of Mexico's water is used for agricultural purposes, and a lot of this water goes to growing avocados. For more on water and agriculture, see our episode 71.
So now let's talk agroecology and food sovereignty. There's been a rise in monocultures and large farms. In Mexico, larger, more successful, export-oriented farmers represent only 3% of private farms, but own 30% of private lands. Still, today, over half of Mexico's territory is owned by small-scale producers. Some small-scale farmers in Mexico have returned to a mixed cropping approach where they grow the three sisters, meaning corn, beans, and squash, with some fruit trees scattered about and some livestock. This model of sustainable farming within the natural limits and with a strong community has become known as agroecology. For more on that, definers turn to episode 23.
Jay, have you ever heard of the Three Sisters before? I hadn't.
I have not.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
But they do sound like they'd all be good in a dish together.
I agree. Okay, narcotics and criminality. So while many in... Oh my God. Sorry, Jay, say it.
Michoacan.
Michoacan. Okay. Over there, they hate the violence that comes with cartels and drug production. They have been working within the cartel system for generations. Some even see it as a positive, with the gangs having deep ties to the community. Further, there are stories of the government using ruthless tactics as well in the name of rooting out gangs. So it's not like, oh, the government is good and the gangs are bad. It's a little more complicated than that.
So, alternative guacamole and shifting consumption patterns. Interestingly, the avocado was once seen as a sustainable substitute. Consider in the 1970s when it became challenging to source fatty tuna and fatty tuna belly for sushi rolls. One chef decided to try the buttery avocado flesh as a sustainable alternative. It became a massive success and led to the creation of what we have in our notes, Scott, is the infamous California roll. I don't know if it's infamous, but I do love it, and
You love it?
order it fairly often.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, I will accept that some sushi fanatics might look down on me for ordering it next to like whatever my other roll is, but it's just good.
Mm-hmm. I love those specialty rolls where you're like, I don't even know what I'm eating right now because there's so much stuff in it, but it works, whatever it is.
With a name like the fire-breathing dragon roll.
You're like, just give it to me. Sure. So, certifying avocados and the role of technology. So in this chapter, Honor says that there are more than 460 sustainability logos on food and beverage packages, and a third of them have been created in the last 15 years. That's crazy, the explosion in those sort of sustainability logos. Mm-hmm. Unlike other certifications for food, the organic standard is actually enshrined in law, and what's required by law can differ nation to nation. For example, the US will certify hydroponics as organic, while the EU does not. And for those not familiar with hydroponics, it's a way to grow plants like crops or medicinal plants without soil by using water-based mineral nutrient solutions in an artificial environment.
All right, so the last chapter we'll touch on is called Genetics and Novel Breeding of Avocados. Marker-assisted selection and genetic modification may allow for new breeds of avocados with desirable traits like less browning that help increase sustainability. However, genetically modified organisms have their challenges, typically around monocultures, high pesticide use, and enabling corporate control. Now, Scott, let's finally start talking about our expert guest. Her name is Honor Eldridge, food systems expert and author of the Avocado Debate.
Yes, Honor Eldridge. She is a food systems expert that has been working in this space for over a decade, both in the US and the UK. She specializes in farming policy and helps to design a support system that allows sustainable production to flourish. She got her undergraduate degree from Georgetown University with me. That's how we know each other. Yes. Oh, Jay, nice. How is accent? And she has master's degrees from Sciences Po and the London School of Economics. Honor's book, The Avocado Debate, was published in November 2023. So, Jay, wrap us up here.
Right. So, Honor closes her book, The Avocado Debate, by without saying whether you should eat avocados. We'll do the same. The main goal of her book and this podcast episode is to help you understand the multifaceted journey that your next avocado took to reach you so you can make an informed decision on whether to buy it. So, enough from us, Scott. Let's hear it from our expert, Honor Eldridge.
All right, Definers, we have now come to the interview portion of our avocado sustainability episode. We have Honor Eldridge here, food systems expert, author of the Avocado Debate. We're going to debate the avocado a little bit here today. So, Honor, thanks for joining us from Greece, right?
Yeah, I'm in Greece. Thanks for having me. It's a long way away, but I'm pleased to be here.
Any avocado production in Greece? I don't remember that being covered.
Oh, yes.
There is some.
Yeah, there is. They're just getting started, but they're in Crete.
Okay.
There's a little sort of produce, a little corner that's getting going on the avocado over here. And I've had an opportunity to taste some of them. I have to say they're pretty good.
Wow. Is it Haas or is it something else?
It's not. It's actually, I don't know the variety exactly, but they're trying to cultivate something that's a bit different to Haas, which is exciting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And we're going to get more to that, the Haas and the differences, but let's dive into your background a little bit. So I know you because we went to Georgetown together.
Yeah.
And so I know that your undergraduate thesis was on cowboys, like in the American West, correct? Do I have your thesis right?
Yes, that's what I did my thesis on. I looked at like cowboys and how they fit with political campaigns and...
Right, who doesn't love that topic?
Exactly, great.
And you worked in political campaigns. So how did you end up in food policy and then diving into avocados? I mean, I kind of know this, but just for the listeners and for Jay that don't know you already.
Yeah, so I was working on political campaigns, and then I ended up working on Capitol Hill for an NGO that was working on sort of sustainability more broadly and food specifically. And I just kind of totally fell in love with food policy. I find it fascinating. We eat every single day, and yeah, it's the most sort of overlooked part of our policy debate often. And yeah, I've hit that food policy expertise and never really looked back.
Right. And then how has that impacted the way you go about your life?
I'm definitely more aware of my sustainability. I think Scott will remember from college, sustainability environment was not the top of my interest list.
Not quite.
No. But I did always love cooking. And I think I cooked a few dinners for Scott here and there.
True.
So I think it's always been part of what I enjoy to do. And I think it's just sort of taken on more of the intellectual side of my life. But I kind of always say, like, I am paid to think about what is sustainable food production all day, every day.
Right.
And I can't really tell you what's sustainable and what isn't. So anybody who comes and tells you, oh, this is good and this is bad, like they don't know what they're talking about because there's no easy answers.
That's like me with recycling, where there's still often things that my fiance asked me, can I recycle this? And I'm like, honestly, I'm not sure. I'm going to Google it, you know?
Exactly.
So just same thing, complicated stuff at times. So avocados, though, did you eat them a lot before you wrote a whole book on it? Are you tired of people asking you if you want avocado toast? Tell us more about that.
I mean, they always went in my sweet green salad, let's face it.
You paid the extra. Impressive.
Exactly. I did. But I think I wasn't sort of totally enamored by the fruit itself, but what I was totally fascinated by was the idea that a fruit could have come to represent an entire generation. That was a bit nuts to me, that the avocado and the millennial were sort of synonymous. And you'd see, you know, I'm based in the UK primarily, and there was a lot of controversy over Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, and, you know, the fact that she ate avocado toast, and it was like a headline in the tabloid newspapers that Meghan Markle ate avocado toast, and I was just like, this is nuts. Like, how has this one fruit taken such a huge role in the zeitgeist? I got to learn more about this.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll dive more into it. Jay, you want to take us to basics?
Yeah, super interesting. So, Honor, we talked in the introduction about some avocado sustainability basics with regards to water, biodiversity, nutrition, social and economic impact, etc. Question for you is there any one aspect of avocado sustainability that you want to go into more depth on here with our listeners perhaps that you find particularly fascinating? Or conversely, do you think our definers should keep in mind as they consider their avocado consumption, perhaps with their own avocado toast in hand while listening?
Sure. I mean, I think what is really interesting to me is that I'm going to presume that a lot of your listeners are American, and therefore you're really talking about Mexican avocados. 90% of avocados in the US come from Mexico, and out of that, 80% come from one region of Mexico, Michoacan. So we can talk about global avocado production, global avocado consumption, but if you're talking about US consumers, you're primarily talking about buying in from Michoacan. And so that gives it a really like specific context in when you're talking about the production. And I think really what I hope my book kind of comes out at is that there are so many different aspects of sustainability, and they're all a bit of trade-offs. So, some avocados might have better social sustainability, but worse water usage, or higher pesticide use, but better transportation. And so it's kind of up to the individual, the consumer, to kind of think about what it is that they care about the most. Do they think the most important thing for them is the carbon footprint, in which case you might be thinking about local production and trying to find something that's more homegrown? Or do you care most about the water side, in which case you might be looking at a product that's grown in a different country and that actually has a lower water usage?
So one thing you mentioned in the book is that there's these traditional subsistence farmers in Michoacan converting to avocado production since it's more lucrative, which you could argue is good. They're making more money. But those that don't make the switch, they're forced onto marginal lands that are either unsuitable for cropping or on native areas, and then that drives further deforestation. And then you also mentioned that they're using agrochemicals, more water to get comparable yields to those that would have been achievable on the fertile land that are now used for avocados. So disturbing trend. Just because you mentioned that region, and this really stood out to me, like what can be done to make sure all that land isn't monocropped and other kinds of farmers aren't pushed out in this way?
So it's got a really complicated and deep history. It's always been an agricultural sort of heartland in Mexico. And avocados, they sort of took off in the 90s and 2000. And Michoacan had already kind of not necessarily industrialized its agriculture by that point, but put in a lot of the infrastructure that you need, like packing houses and highway systems, and the things that you don't necessarily think about when it comes to sort of farming, but actually can make or break a region's ability to produce and export. And they'd already done that, so they were in a really good place to just kind of start to switch over to this highly, highly lucrative product. But yeah, as you say, Scott, it isn't actually that these avocado plantations are going into native forest. It's that they're going into traditional farmland.
Yeah.
And then the subsistence farmers who are growing crops for the region are slowly being pushed onto forest land. And Michoacan has a really incredible biodiversity. It's got a lot of pine forests. It's got a monarch butterfly bio reserve, which is extraordinarily beautiful, and that's really under threat because more and more of this farmland is being turned into avocado production and pushing land use onto these native woodland areas.
Well, Honor, I think you're touching on a lot of interesting themes when it comes to avocado production, and I want to circle back to the basics here. You make the important point that the avocado itself isn't inherently unsustainable, but rather it's the means of production that can cause all these issues. So we've had some great examples here from our neighbor to the south. Can you explain perhaps this topic more broadly to our listeners?
Sure. So it's just a fruit, right? Like it's not good, it's not bad, it's just a fruit.
Yeah, it's not hurting anybody.
No, exactly. It's just doing its thing. And it's
doing its thing.
It's really us that are creating the problems. What a surprise. So you can produce avocados in a super sustainable way. You can have an individual avocado tree amongst all of your other crops in your backyard that you're not irrigating because it's just, being naturally fed by rainwater. You're not applying a load of chemicals to it. It's producing fruit, and that's super sustainable. maintaining pollinators, maintaining biodiversity, producing oxygen, all that good stuff. Or you can do it another way, and you can have a huge, huge orchard that is only growing avocados, only growing Hass avocados, introducing all this sort of vulnerability of just having one variety where disease can spread super rapidly from tree to tree. And pumping it full of agrochemicals that can run off into the ecosystem beyond, like fertilizers or pesticides, and having to irrigate it. You know, a lot of the regions where we grow avocados used to be able to survive on rainwater, but with climate change, they're having to increasingly irrigate their orchards to maintain production, and that's taking water away from local communities. So, you know, it's a real question of how you produce food, not one crop in and of itself. And the same is kind of true for so many different types of food. You know, it's true of chicken, it's true of beef, it's true of tomatoes. How you produce food, whether you decide to do it in an intensive industrial way or in a more sustainable way, will have an impact and change their footprint.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard as a reader where you're like, just tell me whether I can eat it or not. But at the same time, like, that's like the title of the book, The Avocado Debate. Like, there's a debate to be had here. And in particular, I think it's on that means of production. And I know it's done in different ways in different places. There's different considerations. So one thing we wanted to talk to you about is that you mentioned in the book that the UN Food and Agriculture Organization says it expects the avocado to be the second most traded major tropical fruit by 2030 after bananas. So there's a lot of countries getting into this game. And so are there any trade wars or stories from any of these countries you talk about in the book? We've already talked about Mexico a little in depth. Is there another country you want to highlight to our listeners for any reason that you think is just particularly interesting?
Well, I think that what you're seeing is that rising global demand. So, you know, Australia, New Zealand, they have a strong history of using avocados as well. A lot of the cultural associations that we have, you know, the sort of surfer brunchy avo toast, you know, that sort of stems out of Bondi Beach. And I think that has a really deep history to it. And you're seeing that kind of change and play out in their trade negotiations and their dynamics. But I think one of the more interesting aspects is China. So you're seeing a rising demand for avocados in China. It just wasn't part of the diet previously, but, you know, the desire to emulate Western diets, the kind of cultural significance that the avocado has taken on, its sort of ubiquitousness on brunch menus is making it rise in demand in China. And so you're seeing a lot of the African producing nations exporting to China to meet that demand. But China is starting to look at increasing its own avocado production and seeing if it can grow its own fruit. And when China starts doing something, it tends to do it big. So I think, you know, how world avocado production might look could change quite dramatically if they can sort of successfully create a model of growing Chinese avocados.
And just to get a sense of how big this could get, do you know the per capita consumption in the US versus China of avocados? Roughly?
I mean, the amount that was eaten in China in the 90s was like absolutely minuscule. And it's booming. I don't have the figure to hand though.
Yeah, well, it sounds like just yet another strain on this global system, perhaps, that might do more harm than good. But I guess one could debate that.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have not reached peak avocado yet, and I do not think it's anywhere in sight. So I think we've got a lot more production coming our way.
Peak avocado is just a phrase that I love immediately, Honor. All right. So Honor, you make an important point in the book that fair trade and organic certified avocados don't certify the transportation stage of the supply chain. So that's an issue for the food system generally. Is there anything you want to make sure our listeners know about the human side of the food shipping industry? And perhaps if you think that the International Labor Union will notably change conditions on board ships.
I mean, what I think has always been fascinating to me throughout my career is when people think about food production and where their food comes from, they have an image of a nice little farm, maybe with a red barn, a hay bale here or there. Most of the perception that we have of agriculture and farming sort of stops at the farm gate.
Mm-hmm.
And in my book, I really wanted to emphasize like what an incredible supply chain infrastructure has to be in place after the farm gate to get it to your table. And that has huge implications for sustainability and for people along the way. So putting in, huge highways that can transport refrigerated trucks of fruit across Mexico has a huge impact. Maintaining deep sea ports that can hold the shipping containers and can transport food and keep the salt out and keep the damp out. Like that is a huge industry in of itself, and most of the time is hidden from us. And well hidden from us is the people that often make that happen. And there are so many instances of human rights abuses, labor abuses, of people suffering in the supply chain to bring us this food. And I really feel that it needs a bit more of a spotlight shone on it. So I was just hoping in my book to kind of flag it to people that I think the certifications are wonderful. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't choose certified fruit and veg, but your certifiers can only do so much, and you're buying fair trade, and that's great. And you're probably doing it because you care about the people that are producing your food. And there's a whole load of other people that are just missed out of that process.
No, I'm so glad you put a spotlight on it, because it didn't hit me until I read it. And I'm hoping, though, as we zoom in on the people that are on these ships in the high seas, like that, I've read about that before, and it's really just heart-wrenching, some of these stories of people that are out there. Basically, it's lawless, and it's very hard to know what's really going on. And you mentioned this International Labor Union. I don't really know much about it. Like, what are they doing? How can that maybe change the conditions on board ships?
Well, I mean, you're the lawyer, so I suppose there's quite a lot that, maritime law is a fairly difficult space to negotiate and navigate through. And yes. Different countries have different laws on where your ship is registered versus where it is in port versus where it's picking up cargo or delivering it. Like, all of that makes it almost impossible to try and regulate what is happening at sea, let alone the fact that these container ships are in the middle of nowhere, and no one is turning up to inspect their health and safety record when you're halfway across the Atlantic.
Exactly.
So I think that there is a lot of challenges for how you can even start to do that, but increased attention and pressure, I think, is really building it. And there were some pretty fantastic articles that have come out recently about sort of shellfish and fishing industry in Southeast Asia and some of the labor abuses, with investigative journalists sort of shining a spotlight on what is happening. So I think it's about people being more aware and documenting some of that more concretely to try and start to change the conversation and the reality for so many people. Got it.
And I'll shift to the association question. Is it the International Labor Union? I just don't know. But is that something that we can skip it? I don't know if that's been explained. I just thought I read it in the book. I was like, what is that? And obviously I could just Google it. But I
mean, it's a sort of large international NGO, it's trying to be a labor organization that works on these issues when there are international, at an international level, when it's not a domestic issue. But, their scope, their ability, their lobbying power is kind of hindered by the reality of sort of maritime law and how little you can really influence it, I guess.
No, I agree. Maritime law is so complicated, and I'm glad you are shining a light on the human side of all this. And I do want to shift though to another thing humans do, which is form associations, promote their product. And you talk about, like, how did this become part of the zeitgeist? And I thought it was so interesting to read about all the avocado industry associations and their different promotional activities, and how they did a really good job. And also avoided certain things, like the California Avocado Association. They avoided, or at least got rid of, this nickname, the alligator pear, which I can see why it was named that way, but also why that wouldn't necessarily be a thing that would take off. And then you also talk about the California Avocado Commission, which I guess took over from this California Avocado Association, pushed the guacamole bowl. There was a Super Bowl ad commercial in the 1990s. That's when guacamole became big when it comes to the Super Bowl, even though it doesn't really align with when avocados are grown in Mexico, which, as you mentioned already, is where most of the U.S. avocados come from. So having said all that, like, were you surprised at the role associations were playing? Like, what is the role of associations generally on the food system? Is, like you're saying, the avocado is just one way to approach some of these larger issues in our food system.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually one of my favorite bits to write. I kind of loved the idea of these sort of farmers in Southern California getting together in like downtown LA in 1920s and like, you know, in this hotel and just sort of coming up with this idea. And they basically had sort of seen the success that the citrus fruit industry had by forming an association to lobby and market. And they were like, let's do that. And actually, like, the image that they crafted then in the 20s and 30s is still really the image that we have for the avocado today, which is incredible, really. You know, they decided that they wanted to make it about sort of Hollywood cool and actresses, and you know, it was sort of a trendy thing for white women to eat, and they tried to make it part of this sort of growing Hollywood starlet identity, I guess. And it, you know, that's still the case today. We still sort of associate it with LA and Hollywood, and, you know, people think of kind of Gwyneth Paltrow or Miley Cyrus or, you know, or Meghan Markle, as I said, and that's kind of stuck with it. But that was a conscious decision that a group of farmers made in 1920, and it's still influencing the way we think about the avocado today. And yeah, as you said, this sort of guacamole bowl, you know, they'd worked really hard in the 20s. They didn't want it to be associated with Latino culture. They thought that that would be off-putting to white Anglo-Saxon housewives who were doing the weekly shop. And so they'd sort of tried to disassociate it from Latino cuisine. But there was this big sort of surge in criticisms around fat and the sort of dietary impact that fat in your diet would have in the kind of late 80s, early 90s. Avocado consumption plummeted because people thought it was a fatty food and that it wasn't good for them. And so in response, the California Avocado Commission kind of came up with this idea of rebooting the avocado. And so they created this idea of like the guacamole bowl, and they did the first Super Bowl ad for a fruit ever.
Really?
Yeah. They sort of created this character called Mr. Ripe, and they had this like national competition to find Mrs. Right for Mr. Right. And so they had all these women write in.
Oh my God. Oh wait, was Mr. Ripe a human or was it an
avocado? No, it was an avocado. It was a character.
This is amazing.
Like a little cartoon.
Okay.
But if you won the prize, you got to go on Baywatch as well. Wow. Which again sort of taps into this beachy surfer health vibes. So it's kind of fascinating.
Oh, brilliant! Tying it to celebrities is so funny. And you mentioned Miley Cyrus, and in your book you said she has an avocado tattoo on her arm.
Oh my God.
Right?
She does. Oh well, she did. I don't know. Maybe she's removed it now, but yes, she does.
And are you going to get an avocado tattoo?
I don't think so. I did think about it. But
about it?
I did think about it. But actually, I got while I was writing the book, I got an incredibly bad jellyfish sting while swimming in the sea. So I have a little pattern of the tentacles on my leg, which I think will stand for my tattoo for the time being.
Wow.
Fair enough. Well, sorry to hear about that.
Well, Honor, I do have a question, because the more we talk about avocados, the more I see you kind of in the same realm as these wine sommeliers, right? So my question to you is, are you able, blind test or not, to sit down and tell the difference in flavor between some of these varieties you're discussing?
I would love to say so, but absolutely not. It's certainly been fun for me to try and consciously go out and try and buy different types. And so, as I said at the top, like I was very excited when I could try and find a Cretan avocado out in Greece, to try something different. But it is, especially in the UK, I think it's a little easier in the US, but trying to find something that isn't a Hass is really difficult. And, I totally understand that most of the listeners, you're going to go to your supermarket and it's the only option available to you. So what are you going to do? You can track across the entire city to go find the one place that is selling something else. Probably not. You're probably just going to buy the Hass. But one thing that I do think is interesting is that they're trying to start marketing green-skinned avocado as a sort of specialty product. So if you really are an avocado aficionado and you have it on your toast every morning and, you're really invested in it, they're starting to sell you a sort of souped up version, and you can have a green-skinned avocado instead of the Hass, and marketing it as a sort of super luxury version. If that takes off, that would bring in increased diversity into the avocado production. But whether people want to spend even more on their avocado is questionable to me. That's super expensive already.
So even if you can't pick out the varieties, they do taste a little different though, right?
Yeah, very different. And they look very different.
Okay, so you're like, this is not, you'll be like, this is not Hass. I don't know what it is, but it's not Hass.
Exactly. And they look very different. I mean, some people will probably have seen them where like the Hass has that like sort of, alligator skin. It's really kind of knobbly and black, but you can see in supermarkets or grocery stores, when you have that kind of very soft green skin, it's almost as sort of thin as an apple peel, and it's green, sort of real kind of bright emerald green. That's just a completely different strain of avocado. Is just as tasty and delicious. So try and buy them if you see them.
Got
just
it.
Give it a go.
Well, Jay, you said that as you heard Honor talk, she like reminded you of wine sommeliers. I thought you were going to go a different direction and say, as you heard her talk, she reminds you of Hollywood celebrities. That's all right.
Well, she needs her avocado tattoo first.
I do.
True. The jellyfish thing is not celebrity material. Sorry to say. So let's take it, though, to what definers can do. So you say the goal of this book is to explore and expose the complexity of our modern food system through the avocado, and that no food is good and no food is bad. So beyond reading the book, what else do you recommend to our listeners wanting to better understand the nuances about our food system and be conscious food consumers? What should they do?
I think it's just learning more about it. And I think the stories that sit behind the foods that we just mindlessly throw in our shopping basket are really fascinating. And starting to slowly get a better picture of how that food has come to you, and how it's been prepared, how it's been grown, where it's come from, and the people that have put their love and care and attention into getting it to you, is really valuable. I know that I'm totally guilty of this too, is, it's 7 p.m. and you've left work and you go to the grocery store and you just kind of throw a whole load of things in your basket without thinking. But each of those has a story, each of those has a history, and has come to you through a method of production that has an impact on our planet and on our society. And, I sat down and wrote, 70,000 words on one fruit. I am not expecting everybody to do that. And it would be pretty boring if you had to read 70,000 words on everything in your shopping basket. But starting to get a little bit more informed on the nuance and just the stories that are really fascinating, I think are really, really valuable. And the more you learn, the more you want to learn, I think.
And any websites you want to flag in particular? Is like they do a good job of sharing those stories? Or?
Yeah, so there are 2 websites that I really love, which I think are always a really good resource. So there's Civil Eats and there's Modern Farmer. And both of them, I think, do a really nice job of telling the stories of the people that are producing our food, from the undocumented worker through to the geneticist. They slowly kind of build out that picture with detail and empathy and nuance. And I think they both do a really good job.
I also got to say that the phrase modern farmer could also be a new clothing line, perhaps. It has it has that ring to it. So, Honor, this is a perfect segue because our definers are super motivated, and I imagine that some of them are interested in writing a book on a component of sustainability. So here you are, you've done that 70,000 words on avocados. Any advice for definers interested in writing and publishing a book like this?
So I think what I found super helpful with writing this book is that each chapter is distinct and discrete. So like there's a chapter on avocados and water and genetics in avocados and trade in avocados and the nutrition of avocados. And so it didn't feel to me, sitting down to write it, like it was 70,000 words on avocados. It felt like it was 5,000 words on water and then a different 5,000 words on genetics. And it made it feel a lot more achievable to write in those kind of small, distinct chunks.
That's probably a win-win because it's more digestible as a reader too.
I hope so, yes. Hopefully they also, like, I quite wanted them to stand alone so that if you were only interested in the biodiversity aspect, you could just read that chapter and get everything that you needed to know.
Okay, and speaking of these different chapters, I know when you and I talked about the book, you had some clever title names for them that maybe didn't quite make it into the book. We're all about bad jokes here. Can you share one or two of these? Because I just remember you rattling them off and being like, those are hilarious.
So I pitched very hard for a different title for the whole book. I maybe will get in trouble with my publisher, but I was told it wasn't sort of academic and serious enough. But I wanted it to be called Between a Guac and a Hard Place.
Oh, goodness.
Isn't that good, Jay?
Goodness. I love it.
Do you have any one or two chapter titles you want to throw out?
Yeah, sure. I did one of them on kind of like the history of the Haas. The Haas is having its 100th birthday next year, and it's got a kind of quirky little story about how it came into being with a mailman in downtown LA. And so I entitled the book "Shaking That Haas."
That is an interesting history there.
Oh my god. He's good, Honor.
Yeah, I'll hire him for the next book.
Yeah. Well, Honor, we want to do everything we can to support your work. So for listeners that are interested in buying it, do you have a preference as to where they purchase it from? And then even beyond your book, any other avocado sustainability or food system sustainability resources you'd point them to?
Well, I really love bookshop.org. I think it's a really nice way to kind of support your local bookshop, but also have the convenience of ordering it straight to your home. So I'm a big fan of that.
Great.
As a way of maybe breaking some of the monopoly of online purchasing. And in terms of other avocado sustainability, I mean, there are some great articles that have come out. There was actually a piece in The Guardian this morning that came out about the sort of social side of avocado production and what is happening in Michoacan, which is fascinating, just in terms of these sort of local militias sort of taking over production and trying to keep control of the water and so that it goes to the communities and not to the orchards. So I think there's some really great journalism out there. But I have to say, I mean, part of what interested me in writing this book is there isn't actually another book out there on avocados. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to the people that have done some research and in more academic books on the fruit. But in terms of the sort of easy digestible one, I think it's me or it's some great journalists.
Great.
Well, we'll have to look up that article because we haven't written or recorded the intro yet, so we'll get that in there.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, hopefully when you read the chapter, like you can see a lot more of the nuance around how the interplay between the cartels and farmers has been going on for generations. And it's a lot more complicated than just cartels rolled into town and took over production of a lucrative crop.
For sure.
But the report has actually been able to go. So I really wanted to go to Michoacan and be able to kind of see it on the ground. But frankly, it was way too dangerous for me to go, especially at the time I was quite pregnant. And I think that was a bit of a no-no. But yeah, these journalists have been able to go and kind of interview people who are living there and living under the sort of terror of the cartels and trying to find a way through it. And it's fascinating.
So, Honor, let's pretend we're having our own little guacamole bowl here. We've got some friends, we've got some guac, but there's some people at this guacamole bowl, they don't know much about avocados. What would be the one party fact that you would throw out to these people to get their attention and be like, oh my God, I had no idea that was the case with avocados?
Oh God. Okay. I would say that to produce just one avocado takes over 300 liters of water.
Dang. Okay. And I know you talk in the book about the export. When you export that avocado, it's almost like you're exporting the water, right?
Right. So it's true of any fruit, but like if you put a load of water into growing a crop and then that crop gets packaged up and sent halfway across the world, that water goes with it. It's a concept called embedded water. But yeah, it means that it sort of is removed from the natural ecosystem. And that has a sort of compounding impact on the water stress of that region.
And if I recall, like that's a lot, but also there's some like cocoa is way more, right?
I mean, yeah, every crop requires water to grow. Some might say that, beef is the biggest consumer of water going. Mm-hmm. But I think what's particularly interesting for avocados is where they were grown traditionally, they didn't need irrigation. They did survive on rainwater, and it was, in an environment that was perfectly suited to growing them. Particularly, Michoacan has these pine forests, it's mountainous, but climate change is changing that. And as every region of the world is experiencing water stress and increased sort of fluctuations in water levels, more and more they need to be irrigated. And that's going to take water away, especially if you then box them up and ship them to tables in America.
Totally. So it kind of goes back to the means of production point. Like if you grow it in a place that can support that sort of water use, it's not as big a deal. But if you're in a high water stress area, bigger deal.
Yeah, exactly. If you're in a high water stress area and you're exporting it, that's going to have a much bigger impact than if you're in a low water stress region and you're consuming them domestically.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing so many insights on avocado sustainability and writing this book. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners?
Oh, I mean, I can talk about avocados all day, but I think that's enough for everybody, really.
Fair enough. Well, thank you for writing this. Thanks for your time today, and I encourage listeners to check it out. It was a really fun read.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Scott, Anna just cut an avocado for me. I want to go eat it before it starts to turn brown, even though we know it's still perfectly edible. But all things considered, I've got an avocado.
Avocado. Is she pairing that with chocolate chip cookies?
Talk about a spin on avocado toast.
All right. So, Jay, let's do some thank yous.
Right. So we'd like to thank Taylor Price for another stellar set of intro notes. Mm-hmm. Thanks also to Keaton Butler for her audio editing to create this episode. And thanks again to Honor Eldridge for reviewing our intro notes and sources and joining us for the episode.
We also want to thank, as usual, Square Peg Round Hole and Potions for our music. We didn't get a review. Very sad. Again, if you just leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, we'll probably read it because no one else seems to be doing it. So we read one an episode. Please take the time, if you get a chance, just go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. And for those of you that stuck around, we're going to tell you what our next episode's on. It's on sustainable jewelry. Yes. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be out in August, first Friday of the month, per usual. I think that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.